Really what I want to talk about is stories and how stories affect how I think about my work, that it inspires me, and also when, I guess it's a little different for me in a lot of aspects. People come to me kind of with a blank, Brent, this client really wants to be more in tune with Vancouver. What can we do? Do you have any suggestions? So it's sort of a big ask. Pixar, for instance, when they came to Gastown, they came to visit me and loved what I was doing, loved the smell of sawdust. I said, no, you can't have that. I need that for my bath tonight. And they sort of said, okay, Brent, what can you do with our lobby area? And I worked with a really nice, good firm called Evoke. There's kind of a quasi-multidisciplinary business as well. But I was trying to dream up how they would be more integrated into the Vancouver vernacular. I love story. As in my bio, I'm fourth generation. My grandfather drove the streetcar up and down Lonsdale and to a particular place called the Versatile Pacific Shipyard that now is turned into, it's going to be restaurants and there's hotels and all that kind of stuff. But I first started getting wood out of that shipyard over 25 years ago, because I bought my first house for under $105,000 in North Vancouver. Can you believe it? It wasn't the Shangri-La, let me tell you, but I wanted to, it was even too small for myself and my cat. So I thought, well, okay, I'll add on an addition out on the back, but I don't want to go to some hardware store to get wood. I went back to the shipyard because they were taking the buildings down, and I used that wood to put back into the house. Everybody thought I was crazy, and most people still do, actually. But that's how I think. It's about story, it's about materiality. So moving on to the first example, how story affects some of the furniture I've done. These are just called alder cubes. Now at the time, this was probably 15-ish years ago, I was just carving forms out of singular pieces of wood. One was called a saddle bench, and it was a bench that actually I made for some gardens I was designing and building. Because my clients weren't happy, I always perched them on rocks and boulders. And one client, she was in her 70s, she said, Brent, you're crazy if you think I'm going to sit on a cold rock. But I didn't like the furniture that was available at the time. Like back then, there was no furniture in the informs and the living spaces. You had to go to a hardware store, Beaver Lumber, and you had to assemble it and put it together, and it was scaled like the chairs you're sitting on now. It didn't reflect landscape or outdoors at all. So I said, Kate, can I swear?
Yeah.
Screw it. Yeah, screw it. So I went down to Yaletown, and Yaletown was being refurbished, I guess, now restaurants and nightclubs. And if you go down mainland, you notice it's about 5 feet difference between the street level and up where you enter in the businesses. And the reason was because they had cellars at about that depth in each building. There was lots of textile businesses and granaries, and they would store things down there. Consequently, the blocks that came out of there were 5 feet long, perfect for my benches. So I carved my first bench called a saddle bench, put it in Mrs. Sevensma's garden, actually. And when I went back there a day or two later, it was gone. I thought, holy Jesus, West Vancouver, what a bunch of thieves around here. Who would have known, right? So I went to the door, and sure enough, it was in the hallway. I said, why did you move the bench into the... Brent, it's excellent. I could put my shoes on when I go outside. And I thought, well, okay. You're paying the freight, why not? So that sort of got me thinking about furniture. And the alder was about more, I guess, a complex story of the forest. And I guess it was slightly arrogant to think I could do something in a piece of furniture that would talk about the forest. And so I thought, well, why don't I just pick one story? And the story of the alder is how I feel when I'm in the forest. So this is alder sticks that are dried and, and assembled. And we don't fill in between the sticks with resin. Everybody thinks it's black resin, but it's just space. That's just dark space. And I want you to look in and imagine what it's like to be in the forest, where it's darker, where the air is different, the sound is bouncing around in trees, you have to watch where you're going. And, it's been a very successful piece of ours, heavily story-based. Another somewhat of a different story, which sort of relates to the project that I'm going to talk about in a minute, this is called Ikebana. It's a collection I started a few years ago and sort of stopped it because I'm not sure where to take it yet. But these are 3 equal-sized pieces. They're Douglas fir. They could be side tables, could be benches. But it's constructed, they're equal-sized, equal-shaped, and they just rotate around each other. And the interesting thing is, in terms of Ikebana, which is the ancient art of flower arrangement in Japan, they don't focus on the flower. Like in North America, we go to the flower shop, we get flowers and we jam it into a vase and we go, here, honey. There, it's more about how the branch, the leaf, the singular flower, the vessel, how it all relates to each other. It's the space and the relationship between the pieces in the arrangement that are important. And so this piece, and you'll see on the end over there, it's how the negative space and how it allows the other pieces to really shine and to show its differences. That's kind of my jam, actually, is finding these hidden stories in objects that people I don't think would really appreciate initially, but somehow they like it, but they're not sure what it is they like about it. And
so glittery.
It is a lot of glitter on that one. So that's an example of a couple pieces of furniture I've done. So I was asked a year and a half ago by some designers in San Francisco called Gensler to work with their clients called Electronic Arts in Burnaby. And they're renovating, their whole space. They're growing like crazy. But primarily they were interested in the entrance area, the foyer, of people coming in to the building. I said, okay, I'll have a look at it. And this is typically what I would get. Sometimes designers would tear out something out of a magazine and say, Brent, we like that. This was a little better, actually. They sent me about 12 pages of things they wanted to see and conditions that we had to appreciate and respect. You could see there's technology, there's a screen there, because when you came into the business, they wanted to direct people through iPad technology, wireless technology. And then the guy over here in circle, that's sort of more of the functional aspect. They said, Brent, we need some sort of counter there, or some area of the iPads, and a directional area that people have to know where to go. On the bottom right hand, they liked this cleft idea, and that was about it. Blocks of wood, they figured they had the right guy, and benches over there, and that's about it. So then I went to the business and saw the space, and I thought, wow, there's a huge, big vaulted 3-floor ceiling. The windows on the left, it had nice trees there. They liked the cleft, that was sort of in my back of my mind. There was some rock wall. So I started thinking of this story because I was sort of drifting slowly through, like I was Captain Cook or on one of his sailing vessels in the late 1700s, sailing up the English, or the Inside Passage. And the crew back in those days, there were a bunch of 20-year-old kids that just wanted to get the heck out of London. They wanted just to see the world. So I can only imagine, the misty fog rolling in and these big granite cliffs and looking up into these towering trees and just, gobsmacked of what they were seeing. So I told Gensler about the story, and this is what I want to do. And they said, okay, Brent, that sounds great, but there's, the main guy of EA, his name's Frank, he is one tough customer. And it sounds like a bunch of nonsense, to be honest, Brent, but good luck, try, Said, okay, I'll give it a shot. So I went in there, this is Frank, and I pitched my story about nature and the wonders of nature and the mystery, and And I said, Frank, and it's important, we need to get huge logs, big material. I don't want to see any joinery. This isn't a Kate Duncan project, you know? We're not fixating on drawers and doors. It's just massive sculptures. And I want somebody to walk up to that first reception desk and go, God, is that really one piece of wood, you know? And there's Frank going, yeah, you're losing me. And then Frank goes, he just lost his mind. He stood up and he starts pounding the desk. He said, Brent, this is a business. I need a functioning desk. I need security. I said, is this all really necessary? And I said, Frank, look, when they get to that desk and it's one solid, massive piece of tree, they're going to go, holy shit, what is this place? This is amazing. So then Frank jumped up immediately and went, yes, get this guy what he wants. When can you get started? So I sort of appealed to Frank's ego and told him about how great this place was going to be, and not fully appreciating how hard it was going to be to find this material, because, you know, all good stories start with a good script, characters, good sets. So I needed to find the material now to pull this thing off. And I broke down the project in about 3 phases. This was my cliffs. I figured I needed big pieces of wood with some clefts in it, of course. And since I don't go to Home Depot to buy the material of this kind of size, I was scouring around the province, and I came across 2 huge 7-foot diameter spruce logs sitting on Vancouver Island. These were destined to be music wood, very valuable. Probably each log would be about $20,000 if it was music grade. But since there was pitch pockets and streaks in it, they became a bit of a nuisance for them, actually. Huh. So I caught wind of this, went there on a particularly hot day with a cold case of beer and a pocket full of money, and said, geez, those logs look like they're taking up a lot of space there, you know? So before the guy knew what was happening, these logs were in the back of a logging truck, and they were so large, though, I had to rent 1 logging truck per log to carry it out. And I thought I could lift it with a front-end loader. You see it in the background. That thing almost did a somersault when it got its forks underneath. So then we had to hire a crane to load it into the trucks.
Can you imagine?
And I thought, what did I get myself into here? Fuck. So naturally, too big for my shop, so I sent it off to a sawmill. That's Jim Starr. Jim helped me with the project at the mill. We laid it out and did some initial cutting. I had to actually hire the mill itself to get the job done. This is an idea of the size of the blocks that we were producing. Now, to dry something like that, and we're lucky in the province here to have the technology that can dry timbers for timber-framed homes, bridges, and other kind of construction. This is up in Squamish, called Fraser Wood Industries. They put these in a giant, it's like a big microwave oven, but it's called radio frequency wave, how they dry it. But the principle is the same. They pack it like a solid cube of fiber. They drive electricity through it, and then they suck the water out, because electricity gets the water molecules jumping around, and they pull the water out in about 2 weeks. So it's a very violent process, but it's the only way you can dry this stuff. So now I have a real talented guy, and he's here tonight, Kyle Hunick in the back. He helps me with SketchUp and drawing, and he also is a very responsible guy in the shop. So I would work with Kyle initially on the idea of building or designing something. So this is typically how we would work initially with designers, through SketchUp modeling. And they would make some suggestions, which they did at the bottom, and so we added, you know, areas that are a little bigger. Of course, they have needs, security, needed lots of monitors and equipment and so forth. So then we got into the cabinetry, and then that's a whole new other ballgame. So that you can design a lot just simply like that. Now here are some other mountains, or my big boulders, I guess. On those big blocks of wood, they would just have the little iPads. But for me, it was important to show these monolithic, huge pieces with this little iPad on it. I thought that was super cool. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the village, or community, because as you pass through the entranceway, you'd go past the security guards, and you would be met by the villagers. And so I was thinking this might be a little more difficult concept to grasp, especially the villagers at EA all walk around with their dogs under their arms drinking coffee all day, and they're all like 20 years old. So, but I do a piece called The Drum, and there's some drums in a living room. The drum is based on a story of arguably man's first, or human's first, musical instrument. And it's very symbolic in rituals, in ceremony. And I call it a drum not only because of the shape, but when the wood dries, it cracks, and the cracks always point to the middle of the rings, or the center of time. It sort of takes you back when you look at it. So I talk about ancient civilization, music, and coming together. These pieces are generally in these kinds of settings, so I introduced this piece in the project. In terms of getting the material, I have a place out in the back of my shop called The Pen, affectionately The Pen, where I keep wild wood tame and ready for use. I have wood from all over the province in here, even on special projects, like the art gallery in Vancouver had some beautiful Lebanon cedars that came down. They wanted to reincorporate it back into the gallery, so it's here drying, ready for whatever comes up. The next and the last story regarding electronic arts was the idea of the wonder of nature and scale, and sailing under these trees and looking up, and just, it must have been an amazing experience. I still love it when you're walking in the forest and you look up. You just cannot believe these things. So it made me think of a project I did about 18 years ago. It's a restaurant called Dos Caminos on Park Avenue in New York. I worked with a firm in Toronto called Yabu Puschelberg, and they asked me to carve these lanterns out of wooden logs. And it was really effective because you'd look up into these warm, glowing light sculptures, essentially. Interesting enough, to acquire that material, because this is before I was going to sawmills and so forth, I found a Japanese log home builder that couldn't speak English. Of course, I can't speak Japanese. I wanted to buy all his offcuts, which he didn't understand what I was going to do with them. Mm-hmm. So again, I just pulled out some money, said, okay, take them. But I thought, wouldn't this be great to incorporate that into this building, because Electronic Arts had these huge big towers to hold up the ceilings, and everybody walked underneath them all day long, and they were a bit of an eyesore. So I thought, why don't we think of them as the canopy or part of a forest, and have people look up into it and see and just wonder, and just pause for a moment and just wonder about nature. It was a lot more involved than I thought. Finding the flares and the pieces that I wanted, because of course people want me to buy whole logs, which I didn't want to do. But I appealed to their sensibility, because sawmills just want round, straight cylinders. That's what sawmills can cut. They don't want the flared part. So I said, look, and they treat it as waste. I said, look, I'll pay the same amount of money that you charge for the log for that flared part. And they said, okay, that's great, but you need to take a little bit of log. I said, okay, we can do that. So I had a series of a bunch of these short logs, and I just wanted the end parts. So I got them back. This is my shop now. They were giant, and we cleaned them out with chainsaws. Look at that, beautiful. I'm going to bathe in that later tonight. It's beautiful. And then they're all different kinds of shapes, too. So after carving them out and drying them, we would reinforce them with steel. You see the cross pieces up there. That's how they were supported, which was another kind of a complicated issue, is how to engineer a project like this. I got to tell you, Frank called me a number of times wondering where these things are and why it's taking so long. I said, Frank, you'll love it. Don't worry. Get that 6-shooter by your hip. Get ready. So after I carved them all out, I still wasn't sure they were going to hang properly, so I made 1-to-1 scale out of cardboard, and we hung them with ropes in these towers to make sure they hung properly. This is Shannon, one of the lead designers from San Francisco. When we actually delivered these to the site, she jumped in there and said, Brent, take a picture, take a picture. So I said, okay, I'll take a picture. So these are some drawings, more drawings, and that's Mr. Lum's engineer stamp, so now it's good to go. And here's the opening ceremonies. I know you guys are big fans, so I thought we would show, you know, the Donald and the family. And so the project, they weren't there, don't worry. So this is how it turned out. Those are the big boulders on the side with the iPads. You see to the left behind there, there's trees, and this is how you enter the village. Somehow the villager there has lost his way or is leaving or something, but at the very end there, you can see the security desks. And that's looking back. You see how the drums are used for gathering, and there's those benches. That's a close-up of the desk. Here's the big lanterns hanging up in the towers. They're really cool. Acrylic, so they had a nice soft glow. Again, there's a tower in the background too. So there's a series of these towers that have the lanterns in. And he's on his way to the restaurant. That's over top of the server. So it gives you an idea of the size of these things. That's it. Thank you.